Welcome to the Pediatric Playbook, where we guide growth in children and balance in ourselves. I'm Amanda, a pediatric occupational therapist, here to share stories, strategies, and insights to support parents, therapists, teachers, and caregivers as we navigate the ever-evolving world of child development together. From tackling potty training and sensory needs to celebrating milestones, this podcast is your go-to resource for practical advice, inspiring stories, and honest conversations. Each week, we'll explore topics that matter to you, whether you're a parent looking for answers or a pediatric OT, SLP, PT, or educator searching for fresh perspectives. I'll also sit down with other therapists and professionals to dive into their unique journeys and the lessons they've learned along the way. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into this journey together. Whether you're here for personal growth, professional insights, or a little bit of both, I am so glad you're here. Welcome back to the Pediatric Playbook. I'm Amanda, and if this is your first time listening, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. Today, we're diving into some topics that so many parents struggle with: bedtime and emotional regulation and sensory processing, all the good things. If you've ever felt like getting your child to sleep is more like running an actual marathon, you're definitely not alone. But what if sensory needs are playing a bigger role in your child's life than you even realize? Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Courtney English, a pediatric occupational therapist and mom with incredible expertise in the nervous system, sensory regulation, and bedtime routines. Not only is Courtney a talented OT, but she's also a mom who uses these strategies with her own child every day. She's here to share her personal journey as an OT and a parent, some practical tips for you to take with you today, and how sensory-friendly routines can transform bedtime for your family. Courtney, welcome to the show. I am beyond grateful to have you joining us today, and I cannot wait to learn from you.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such a nice intro. I was like, wow.
I literally refer your page to like all of the families I work with. They always have so many questions, especially about bedtime. And I'm like, oh, this girl is the expert. Look her up on Instagram. Go follow immediately. And they all do. So I just
Oh,
love
thank
your page.
you. Same
You're
to you
welcome.
for potty training. I'm like, that's not me. Go see Amanda.
I love it. We all have our little areas
Yes.
where we flourish.
Yes. Yes. And that's how you best support parents, I feel like. It's like, well, I'm that's not my area. Like, go see this person. That's their area. Like when you kind of specialize in something, then you really know it, all from a whole perspective, and all the ins and outs. So that's why I think it's important to do that, and that we have that community online that we can refer parents to different people.
For sure. And I feel like social media has really helped us grow and understanding like, sensory is not just a little hidden thing for OTs that we get to do. It's like SLPs and PTs and parents and everybody should be doing sensory based activities and should be learning about sensory and regulation, whether your child
Hmm.
is neurotypical, neurodivergent, no matter what is going on, parents need to know that this is normal.
Yes, it is normal. And everyone's just different. And once you understand how you process the world or how your child processes the world, then you better understand how to modify, adapt your lifestyle, or, use certain strategies to help yourself get through your daily life in an enjoyable, regulated way, right?
For sure. I love that. I literally cannot wait to digest all of this. But I'd love to start by learning a little bit more about you. You gave me a little bit of your background and bio, and I was so interested. Can you tell us about your journey as an occupational therapist so far and how you got started? What led you to where you are now?
Yes, absolutely. So, I went to school for PT because I was like, oh, I want to do therapy, like physical therapy is so cool. And then I learned about OT and I was like, oh, I definitely want to do OT. Side note, my cousin, who's like a year older than me, got in a trampoline accident, and she like was doing a backflip and hurt her neck and had a spinal cord injury. And so she went to like the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, which is now the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And I saw that what the OTs did with her, and I love what the PTs were doing because ultimately we really wanted her to walk again, which she did, was like a miracle. It was really inspiring. And but seeing how the OTs focused on all the functional things that she really wanted to do independently, I was like, oh, I definitely want, like, I think I'm going to change to that. So I moved into OT, went to OT school, And then one of my clinical settings was in hand therapy at Rush in Chicago. And so at Midwest Orthopedics at Rush. So I did my clinical there, one of them, started a job there, worked there for 6 years, had a baby, decided I need to dive into peds because I had really bad postpartum anxiety about her development, even though she was literally like a newborn. I was like, I feel like I learned all this stuff and I haven't been practicing this. I need to like learn about this and I want to support her the best. And as CHTs, like certified hand therapists and OT, like the workload is kind of stressful in the clinic. It's like really fun, but when you have a lot going on outside of your life, like you're a mom and you're busy, it's really hard to keep that up. At least it was for me. So then I switched to Pete's and I've been doing that for 4 years now.
Wow. I mean, it's so crazy because I can't even imagine doing hand, like true upper extremity outpatient. Like that is just such a different, like, part of my brain that I feel like has went away since OT school because I just compartmentalized that so much. And
Oh yeah.
one of my good friends from grad school, she is a CHT and she is amazing, but her brain just works completely different from mine. So it's cool how, different OTs can do different things with the same
Mhm.
degree, but it's so different. So it's amazing that you were able to make the switch from doing adult and doing hand therapy to completely switching to do pediatrics.
It was a crazy transition. I mean, it was nice because I found a job that allowed me to do like PRN. So I could just pick up a couple clients as I learned, like you relearned everything. And I was still working in the hand therapy clinic. And then once my caseload started to build up, I dropped that and started to just do peds. But I mean, it was a transition. Like, you know how different it is. It's so different. It's like, I don't even know
It
how to explain it.
literally
It's
is.
just crazy. Yeah.
It's so crazy. I'm sure any of the OTs listening are probably in awe that you did that. I know, maybe some people that don't understand the two different worlds, but it is crazy. So what inspired you then to focus more in on sensory regulation and those bedtime routines specifically? Like, was there a particular moment or an experience that sparked this interest for you?
With regulation, I just realized as working in the clinic and working with my clients that regulation was kind of like what I had to work on first with a lot of the kids. And I had to know how to get them to this optimal zone of regulation or optimal level of attention, alertness, or calmness, depending on their arousal level. And I realized that even if we were working on different skills, regulation impacted everything. We had to make sure that, they weren't dysregulated, or some kids were also presented with a lot of anxiety, and that was mainly like the reason why a lot of the other problems were happening was because of this underlying like constant fight or flight, constantly like on edge, and anything could kind of tip them into having this like panic, so that's why I started to focus on that. And then also, like, as my daughter got older, I started to notice that like she in some areas, and she's been doing great because I've been, doing a lot of things with her. And I actually got her into OT because I noticed some of her motor skills were like a little bit delayed. She had a hard time with some motor planning, like larger movements.
Yeah.
And her attention, I just realized she was just kind of like low registration for things. And it was like a lot for her to process things. And I wanted to help her with like, those motor and arousal levels. So I started really diving into it and exploring it with her. And so that's kind of where everything started. And just to see, like, through my own experience by implementing these things in everyday life, just seeing like the neuroplasticity occur like before my eyes is like, it's like I have my own like testimony for it, like I'm like, this does work. Neuroplasticity is real. If you are consistent, you will see a change in the way that a child processes the world.
For,
So
for
it's
sure. And
crazy.
their brains are like little sponges, when they're in those
Uh-huh.
early childhood ages and we think, can they really understand this? Or, is this really going to carry over to adulthood? But gosh, I just wish our generation of parents and grandparents knew
Oh,
all of this and had access to all of this great information, because maybe so many of us as adults would be living with so much like anxiety and ADHD and
oh yeah.
dysregulation. Like I see it in myself. I literally had my own personal therapy appointment this morning and I'm like,
Mhm. No, it's true. And that's kind of something that I also learned about myself. Like as I was going through this with Danielle, as I learned a lot about my own nervous system and why maybe I struggled so badly postpartum with Daniela, my first, because I just was in this constant state of fight or flight. There were too many new things. There were too many demands. I felt like I couldn't keep up. I didn't, there was like all these doctor's appointments. She had to gain more weight. I was trying to breastfeed. There's so many new things, and my nervous system was so dysregulated that anything or any change or anything new set me off into more panic. And my body held that. And I felt that like, my heart would be racing, I'd start sweating, all of those sympathetic symptoms or like signs. I experienced that and almost thinking that there was something physically wrong with me, where I would go to like doctors and saw like different physicians, and they were all like, yeah, this is just all like autonomic nervous system stuff. And I'm like, yep, okay. Makes
Well,
sense
and
now.
right. And it's crazy. I think so many people think that anxiety and attention and all these other things are just all separate entities, but it all
hmm
comes back to neuro. And honestly, at the end of the day, it all comes back to sensory, right?
Yes, sensory. And there is like a top-down component, right? Like bottom up is sensory because it's like, the bottom of the pyramid. But as we get older and we start to learn about what our thoughts really mean to us and how we categorize things as like safe or not safe, that's kind of where I think adults really have the whereabout to like kind of turn their upper brain online, like that top part of the brain where they can really think logically to really help kids like with that regulation, right? And I think that's something that we don't realize how powerful it is, because we have like such a, our prefrontal cortex is more developed than children, and so we do have the ability to really use our thoughts to change our own state of regulation. And eventually, by the way that we talk to our kids, and that's part of one of my programs, is like regulation talk, and like how to teach your child to like understand what's happening within their body and what that means to them.
Yeah.
That's where true regulation occurs, because we're learning how to identify our triggers and our stresses, and then we're learning if I need to like modify how I'm doing it, do something for my body physically,
Yeah.
or whatever the thing, because sometimes it's like a thinking thing, right? Like kind of like what is it called, CBT, like
Yep.
where our thinking patterns, and as children get older we can start to help guide them through that. But yeah, it's crazy how it's all interconnected, because stems from the state of our nervous system. And then we can, once we get our nervous system regulated, we could really access that top part of our brain to really change the way we think, or maybe we would respond next time. Or, I did that with Daniela. When she would start to get upset, maybe she would like fall and get hurt and would start crying and be like scared of something. And, obviously we would co-regulate first, but I'd be like, oh, like, sometimes like your face looks really red, I'm like identifying all these things, like feel how fast your heart's beating. Like what we can do is maybe we could go have a drink of cool water, or we can, if you want, you can have a popsicle to help cool your body down. So she can start to make those associations like, oh yeah, I do feel all this, like my heart's racing and I feel really anxious and nervous after something like scary happened. And there's something that I can do to like get myself back to a better state and feel more
Yeah.
safe. Yeah. And it's just crazy because it's not like super complex, like the strategies for it, right? But
Yeah.
it's like the process is a process and a concept to learn.
For
So,
sure. And like you said, it's something that everyone has to learn. And as even as
mhm.
therapists, it's something that we have to learn. But I'm sure as you have become a mom and you're pregnant again, so you're going to have another little one at home, which is so exciting. But
Yes.
like, how has work specifically influenced your own parenting and understanding all of these things after you've gotten to research and learn more about sensory?
Oh my gosh. Well, I utilize pretty much everything that I talk about, but I've also caught myself in times being dysregulated and maybe like reacting versus responding. And I'm like, ooh, like I need to like tone it down. Like my tone's a little bit like I'm giving off this, neuro Wi-Fi. I'm giving off this kind of threatening response because I'm angry about the situation or about like whatever, behavior or whatever. So there have been times where I've really had to like check myself, and then like I'll have to sometimes, even my husband like, oh, like pause. And then I'm like, listen, I do this too. Like, it's like it's really hard, right? To like
Yeah.
to practice what you preach sometimes, because our nervous system is so powerful. It can really take over. So I've just tried to be like give myself grace and to realize like that I'm not always going to be perfect with how I do it, but I do try to build in sensory routines for proactive regulation. That's like my
Yeah.
main thing to answer your question.
No,
Yeah,
you're good.
proactive regulation. So I try to use, the tools that I know will work and the tools that I've like kind of tried with her and seen, oh, she likes this, or I saw her playing like this. I bet you I can build something into that play
Yeah.
routine or whatever, so that I'm, because this, you've done you do early intervention and you've worked with
Yep.
clients. It's like the parents are like, oh, what do I do? I like don't have time to be like, time out, let's do a sensory obstacle course or whatever, which sometimes
Yeah.
you're at home and you have that ability, but when we're busy, we need to be able to build it in. You could still build in some kind of an obstacle course or some type of thing within your routine or your transition.
Yeah.
It's really about the small moments. Same thing of like the polyvagal theory. It's like those micro moments of connection and regulation where we build up throughout the day, and then it helps keep our cup balanced, right?
For
I feel like,
For sure. Yeah. And I
yeah.
love how you're just normalizing this for parents too. And knowing, even as an OT, this is something that you have to learn how to do as a parent, and you have to learn how to regulate yourself. And you're still learning
Mm-hmm.
strategies, even knowing them all that work well for your daughter and for your clients. And so it's completely normal. And every single person has a sensory system. We all have all of our different sensory systems, and they all function just a little bit different. So it's not sensory is not a word to be scared of or to avoid talking
Mm-hmm.
about. It's very normal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Because some people get a little bit nervous when they hear that because they automatically think, oh, something's wrong if I have to do sensory like regulation or sensory processing. Like people tend to get a little nervous because they're worried that something's wrong. Um, which is not. I actually went through that myself. I was like, oh, like, can I just do this OT stuff with her at home, or should I get an informal OT? And I was like, when I went there, I realized how important it was for me to take her to like a private clinic, because then I no longer had the stress on me and I was able to be a mom and still do my stuff at home, but someone else was guiding the plan of care to help get her to where she's at. And I'm so thankful for it.
Yeah, and it's hard to take on that role of therapist and mom. And I think that that's so
Hmm.
important for any therapist listening to that might have children. And even if you're a physical therapist or a speech therapist, OT, your child may still be delayed with their gross motor skills or their speech skills. And it's okay. And it's okay to seek
Yes.
external help so that you're not stressed
Yeah.
out and taking all of this pressure on yourself as a parent.
Yes. And it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. I feel like that's a big thing too. It's like, what did I do wrong? Did I not do enough tummy time? Did I not do enough, floor time? Did I not, with feeding? It's like, oh, did I not expose them to enough things? Like I should have done baby-led weaning. I was too scared. Like I'll admit it, I was too scared to do baby-led weaning with my daughter because I was in such a state of fight or flight that like it was like, oh, the safe way was purees until she was, I think it was like maybe like 7 or 8 months. Like I
Yeah.
think you're supposed to start earlier. I don't know. She was a little bit older than I would have liked, but it's okay and they'll be okay. And there's nothing that you did wrong. Like we are adaptable people, and that's how we grow and learn, and we will learn how to adapt, right? So I always like to say that because I struggled
Yeah.
with a lot of anxiety postpartum and developmental anxiety, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
And I think that it helps when parents can hear that they're not alone and they're not crazy for feeling that way, and they don't need to feel bad and feel guilty like they did something wrong, because they didn't.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up the baby led weaning thing because I think that's such a hot topic, and it is very anxiety provoking, especially if it's your first baby and you don't know how this goes and you don't know how their body functions. And, it's
Yeah.
okay if that's not the route. There's not only one way to go about feeding and presenting foods for your kids. And so I know social
Hmm.
media can feel very pressuring and saying like this way is the best way to do it, but when it
Hmm.
comes to all things, feeding, potty training, sensory, there's not
Yes.
one road that you have to take. And I think the most important thing is doing what parents feel is best for their family and their child, and going through with that. And if it doesn't work, try something else the next time, so
Yes.
it's okay to take the route that you want to.
Yes,
And
exactly. I think that's helpful for everyone to feel more calm and regulated, and to not be so hard on themselves about it. Like it will work out. It will be okay. You will figure out a way.
Exactly. I
Yes.
really want to take some time to, I know we've been talking a lot about sensory processing, but I would love
Mhm.
to take some time to actually dive into what sensory processing and emotional regulation are. So, if there's parents who might not be familiar that are listening, can you explain what these terms kind of mean and why they're so important? And
Mhm.
are these strategies just for neurodivergent children, or are they able to be used across the board for anybody?
Yes, well, anyone can utilize strategies for to improve sensory regulation for how they process sensory input. Now, to me, I always think of like, oh, it just depends on like the intensity. Like, are you very overly intensely sensitive to this stimuli, or are you very like you need so much more of this stimuli? So it really just depends on the intensity, which brings you back to sensory profiles, essentially, right? Like how do you respond to this, and where do you kind of lie on the scale of like sensory profile? So a sensory profile, as you know, is whether you can fit into different categories, but the three main categories that I talk about are, seeking, which we hear a lot of. It's very hot topic right now, trending. I feel like sensory
Yes.
seeker, is your child a sensory seeker?
Yes.
Seeking, over responsive or sensitive. And then, so seeking would be high threshold, and then the other high threshold would be low registration. So like you're seeking because you need so much more and you need more to feel calm and organized. And then the second one is high threshold but low registration. So I need so much more to register that input as another, maybe like someone else, like a different peer would, or another person. So sometimes I like tie that into motor. Like you might notice kids are like more slouchy and low affect because they need so much more stimuli and input to like wake up their muscles, to be alert, to be upright, have a good posture, and coordinate themselves, kind of like a clumsy looking, or identified as labeled, unfortunately, as clumsy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where Daniela fell into for some of it before. But as we know, those things will change too. Things can change as neuroplasticity occurs. And then the low threshold is like the smaller cup. So they can't really tolerate as much input. It can be really dysregulating and really hard for them to participate in daily routines like self-care because, they processing that is really painful for them or overwhelming for them. So that's kind of where I start with sensory regulation, is understanding that your child's sensory profile and your profile as their parent is different, which can cause problems if we have conflicting. Because I feel like a lot of times when we have younger kids, they might appear to be sensory seeking, which doesn't mean they're always going to be a sensory seeker, but their nervous system, their sensory system is immature. It's developing every single day, right? And so our parents tend to be a little bit more overstimulated. So we have like conflicting, and finding, realizing that, so that you can kind of identify like, oh, this is triggering to me, but this is how I can support my child in a way that's not triggering to me. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like the first step, I guess
Yeah.
you could say.
For sure. I mean, there's so much that goes into it, and there's so many different ways that you can approach this. And I think,
Hmm.
you, for parents that might be having concerns for their child, with sensory
Hmm.
processing, finding a professional like yourself or a local occupational therapist in your area that can really help outline and show you what that really is. Like, what is
Yes.
my child's sensory profile and what do I do with this information?
Yes, and I also have a free sensory profile handout if you subscribe to my emails for free. And so that you can log into it and open it up and kind of see the different, it's all categorized, and it's a checklist. So you can like check it if you see those signs or like behaviors or whatever in your child, to kind of get a better understanding of how they process it. And that's how you know what to build in for your child. But we all know that, like, we always talk about heavy work and how proprioceptive input, like when in doubt, probe it out. It's typically always going to either help alert your child or calm your child, depending on their arousal level.
Yeah.
And then, the other two magic systems is like touch and movement. And we know that, like, in order for kids to learn, they need to move anyways. So, like, let's move them in an organized way. And kids are definitely happier when they're able to move their bodies, and feel safer when they're able to move their bodies. So
Definitely. I
it
love
sounds complex, but it's really not, if you leave out all the science.
For sure. I love that
Yeah.
you have that resource, and I'll make sure I link it for everybody so that they can find your resources, because I know that's going to be so helpful for parents to have something that they don't have to go specifically get an evaluation done by an OT. I know wait lists can be super long, so I'm sure your resources
Mm-hmm.
are going to be so helpful for our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit about bedtime,
Mm-hmm.
and how these sensory challenges and differences can specifically impact bedtime and bedtime routines. I hear time and
Mm-hmm.
time again from parents that they cannot get their child to fall asleep, they can't get them to stay asleep. And I know, the first line of defense is often the pediatrician. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, well, we don't want to do any kind of like supplements or gummies or anything. Like, how can we support these children, and how are these sensory challenges showing up?
Well, a lot of the times I've noticed with at bedtime is, first of all, it's the time of the day, right? It's at the end of the day, and maybe our nervous systems are overwhelmed and overstimulated, or maybe we didn't get enough of a certain movement. Like, say a child sets their profile as they're a seeker and they need a lot of movement and a lot of input. So maybe they're a seeker and they need a lot more input. Maybe they had to sit at school all day. So when they get home, and maybe when they get home, it's like, they get to play a little bit by themselves, and then it's dinner time, and then it's bedtime, and it's like all of a sudden I no longer have um my sensory system is I need more input, in order for me to feel calm and organized in my body and to feel safe. So it's kind of learning about your child's sensory profile and what they need. Do they need more movement? Do they need more touch? Do they need less? Maybe they're sensitive to something, sensitive to touch or tactile experiences, certain ones. And then, they've had a lot of that experience at school or maybe throughout their day, whatever they did. And then it comes down to bedtime after eating too, because we know feeding can be hard for those kids too. And now we have to brush our hair and brush our teeth and do all these things. And so, how can we help balance our sensory cup? So, a lot of the times, I tell parents, like the first thing we talk about too is like also sleep science, because sleep we need to know about. If your child's overtired, they may kind of present with the zoomies because their body is overtired and you get that like second wind. So adjusting their bedtime, and just I've worked with a lot of sleep consultants, and they tell me that the most ideal time for like sleep cycle regulation is for parents to do bedtime between 6 and 8 p.m.
Okay.
That I mean, so I've always tried to get Daniela down to bed before 8 p.m.
Yeah.
And then also like knowing like, oh, if they had a nap, like, depending on their age, what is the amount, um, the length of their wake window that they need to meet in order for there to be enough sleep pressure for them to fall asleep. So that's important to take into consideration too. And then usually I try to build in, input into like the routine um, if they need more input, and then taking away things maybe that we don't need at bedtime, maybe we could do in the morning. Like maybe if bath is too much, we do bath in the morning. Maybe we don't do it every day. Maybe when we are getting our hair brushed, we get to have a bedtime snack, like a smoothie, and we're sucking through a straw, because then we're layering in some regulating input. So there's a lot of different things that you can do that are not super complex, that you can build into your routines to know how to meet your child um, in the right place, so that it's not overwhelming for you or the child, but it's going to help with that nervous system regulation. Did I answer that
Yeah.
question? Well, okay.
No, that was so helpful. And it's really important, like you said, to just kind of outline and see where these things are coming from, what's impacting it. I'd love to know, is there a specific window of time between nap and bedtime that parents should be looking for hour-wise?
Well, it just depends on their age. The younger they are, the shorter the wake window. So like, kids who are younger, who are like 2, like they have like probably a longer nap. But usually I say, cap the nap around like, depending on their age. So like Daniela, if she takes a nap, she's almost 4 now. She takes a nap, she cannot sleep past 3 p.m. because she will have let's see here, 3 p.m. So if I put her down, she was about at 8, she has 5-hour wake window. And 5 to 6 hour wake window for her is appropriate for her age, as between like 3 and 4. So, but if she woke up at 4 or 5, then she would probably won't be tired until like 9 or 10. So
Yeah.
I actually, again, I have these all a whole list of it's grouped by like 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, 3, 4, and 5 for wake windows and optimal like bedtimes, because like when they're younger, it's a little bit earlier sometimes, and then as they get older, it's a little bit later, for just to like accommodate for sleep pressure.
Yeah.
So that's also I'll send you that too so you can link it
Yeah.
in
I
the
love
show notes.
that's going to be such a great resource because I know that's such a big question and a hot topic on like, well, my kid finally went down for a nap. I don't want to wake them up, but
Yes.
trying to build that consistent routine, it might be beneficial to kind of cut that nap a little bit short. That way you can have that consistent nighttime bed routine. And once you kind of get them in a routine, then they can be in it. But if we're constantly changing our nap time,
Yeah.
our bedtimes, and it looks
Hmm.
completely different every day, it's harder to get
Yes.
in that consistent routine. And
Yes.
how are parents supposed to know, like, is it sensory or is it typical resistance or is there a difference? Is it always sensory?
I've been learning that with my own daughter. And you can usually tell, like, and it's more, I guess it's more of like the intensity of like what they need. And I always try to honor that sensory regulation first. And then after I've given it to them, given it and presented it to her, and she's still like fighting it, I'm like, oh, okay, like now I know that this is behavioral. So now I know that I need to hold my boundary. I've already given her like, all these different inputs that I know regulates her. And I also say, you can do like a bedtime snack depending on like when dinner is, or just as long as it's, appropriate. Then we want it to be like high in fat, low in sugar, high in protein. And so that's why I like to do like, those like smoothies and stuff, because like homemade smoothies with like, milk, banana, peanut butter, whatever, because that is going to be helpful in increasing the neurotransmitters that help cause sleepiness too. Um, and those are all in my bedtime guides too. I have all of the different stuff laid out. But
Amazing.
but yeah, it's just like I feel like, and it's hard to like train someone in this because every child's different, but if you give them the sensory stuff first and the sensory regulation, and you build it in and they're fighting it, and then you give them a little bit more and they're still fighting it, I'm like, okay, either like you're just really dysregulated, you might be chronically dysregulated from like this past week, because right, we're looking at all the other environmental factors. Maybe it was the holidays, or maybe we it's the end of the week and you were at school a lot, right? So like I try to take that into consideration too. But when I know when I need to hold my boundary with her now. So you kind of have to play with it. But yes, I always say sensory first, then you can hold your boundary because you've already offered it, and you've
Yeah,
already presented it.
for sure. And I know we've been talking a lot about your, night routine, your bedtime routine, and these sensory activities. Can you give us just a couple of your favorite sensory
Yeah.
activity tools that you use with Daniela for calming her before bed?
Yes. So she loves to do bath every night before bed. And I love bath because it's such a wonderful experience as long as your child isn't over responsive to like the bubbles and the water and the sounds in the bathroom, right? Because that can, if your child's more of like sensitive and over responsive, it might be something that you wouldn't do or you would do earlier in the day,
Yeah.
or in the routine, depending on the age. But anyways, so bath time, we do bubble trumpet. So like blowing bubbles, because we know that breath work, playful breath work is organizing and activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which we want that nervous part of the nervous system to be activated at bedtime. We want to try to combat and turn off the sympathetic, which is like that fight or flight and more active. Um, Before bed. So we do bubble trumpet. I put those suction squigs into the bathtub for her to pull. She's got like little tongs and those glow pals, so she can kind of like play with those. Sometimes I put the pop tube in there and she makes big bubble mountains. We're blowing out again. Um, Recently she's really into bath bombs, like, and I'm like, okay, like, it has like a calming scent to it, so we're adding in all these different sensory components that we're probably not even really realizing. And then
Yeah.
I get these big buckets and she like scoops and dumps, so that's kind of where we're getting a lot of like heavy work, breath work, and we're just playing in the bathtub. A little bit of
Yeah.
olfactory, the scents and everything. And then Well, you transition, and I've been using a visual schedule for this because I feel like it helps her stay on task and it helps her know what to expect so that she knows, and we go over it before. But then we usually go and get dressed. We put her PJs on, right? And I've made an obstacle course out of dressing to make it more
Love
because I'm
that.
like, dressing isn't really fun for a lot of kids,
Yep.
especially if it's frustrating for them, if it's a hard motor plan. So we set up like her little stepping stones and the balance boards upside down, and she rolls the dice and then she sees what the dice is, and if it's like four, then she goes onto four steps and then she jumps off and crashes or just jumps off, and then we put on an article of clothing and then she rolls the dice again and then we do that. So you can obviously modify that, but I try to make it like a obstacle course to be able to get one article of clothing. So we do shirt, we do pull up still for bed. I'll
Yeah.
talk to you about that separately. Shirt, pull up, pants, and then socks, one of each. So we get like 5-ish reps in. We know that that's pretty good, like 3 to 5 reps for
Yeah.
those things. So we do that. Then we go do brushing teeth. Sometimes I'll put like little jumping things in between, or we'll sing the ants go marching to transition to brushing our teeth. We'll brush our teeth. Sometimes we brush our hair. We're a little sensitive to that. So if it's not bad, sometimes I'm like, you know what, it's okay. Or, if she wants like a smoothie, I'll try to, layer that in. And then usually I just kind of see like what time it is. And I kind of see, is she getting a little bit more wired, or do I need to start doing more calming? And then usually I try to switch it to calming. We turn down the lights, right, for the circadian rhythm to really pick up, okay, it's nighttime, the lights are down. And then, that pacemaker, it kind of tells everything else, guys, like, let's start releasing the chemicals that make us go to bed. And doing more like calming stuff. So like rocking, deep pressure, cuddles, connection. I actually like have a book for this. So it's like the first two are movement. The third is heavy work, like crawling and marching. And then the last three are like, you're supposed to do like slower movements. As you start to get towards the end of your bedtime routine, when the lights go down, like you're supposed to also change how you move, right? I'm
Yes.
moving slower, I'm talking lower, like I might even whisper, like it might be a little silly, but like we're whispering because we're really
Yeah.
trying to cue to the brain, guys, like time to shut down, time to close up.
And I
So
love that book of yours. I literally use it in that same order and routine sometimes throughout my OT sessions when I know I've got to get a kid aroused and then calm down before I leave. I
yeah.
love it so much. I use it all the time.
Yeah, it is good practice for the nervous system to kind of learn how to transition.
For
And I
sure.
tell parents, like, you don't have to read the book all at once. You can do like half the book before bath, and you can do the other half after bath if you really feel like your child gets upregulated easily, needs kind of down-regulating support. So, but yeah, that's kind of what we do. We do cuddles. Sometimes, like, if she still is not, maybe like her sleep, I'm like, oh, we need a little bit more time. She's not going to be sleepy enough because her sleep pressure, because she like fell asleep later in the day or whatever. We'll go and lay in bed with the lights off and then use a little flashlight and read books for a little bit longer in bed together. Like I'll lay with her because I'm like, oh, like I just know if I leave her now, like she won't fall asleep, and then it will cause her to be dysregulated because she'll be like, oh, like I'm so awake, I can't fall asleep.
Yeah.
So I usually say, if, and I've learned this from the sleep consultants that I've worked with, is if it's like longer than 20 to 25 minutes for your child to fall asleep, they don't have enough sleep pressure and
Wow.
they need an adjustment to the timing of bedtime and everything, or they might just need more movement, or because movement and exercise throughout the day, that increases I think it's adenosine. It's like a neurotransmitter, and that helps increase sleep pressure. So yeah, I mean,
Wow.
it's the
There,
whole thing. That's why I have a whole guide and a whole
yeah.
like consultation, because it's, once you learn it all, you're like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. And that's why my child's being like this or acting this way, or that's why this was hard. And this is what I can do to kind of modify that.
Yeah, I literally have learned so much about sleep that I didn't know. So this is going to be so helpful, I think, for therapists and parents out there. And I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit because
Yes.
you're talking about breath work a little bit and how important it is. And I often talk about breath work in a different way when I'm relating it back to potty training and
Yes.
the big importance of using our breath and coordinating our breath. And I know I love you always are sharing great bubble options from Amazon and different tools to help kids learn how to regulate that breath. So I'd love if you are open to sharing how you addressed or are continuing to address potty training with your child and how this sensory may have impacted this routine for you guys.
Yes. So, because of the sensory processing from like my daughter specifically, like sometimes I feel like when she's distracted and she has a lot of things going on, which we see in a lot of kids, right? If they're playing and they're in the middle of an idea, they're like, oh, like I'm going to hold it longer. Or for her, sometimes I feel like because of that kind of tendency for her to be more low registration, she needs her bladder to be so much more full for her to realize. And so I feel like last minute she's like, I gotta go. And like she might have already like went a little bit, but she will make it there. So we're working on kind of, and I think over time, like she'll start to build that, mind body connection of like, oh, this is this feeling is when I need to go, not when it's this full, does that make sense?
Yeah,
So it's funny because of that, she is independent in number two, which I know sometimes for other people is really hard. And
usually
she
the struggle.
like
Yeah.
is yes, so she's like good with that. But that for her is like her bladder really picking up on what she's doing. And if she's more organized in what she's doing, she's like, oh, she knows. But like if she's overwhelmed, like sometimes I feel like we're in a busy environment out in public, there's a lot of things going on. It's like, how do I tune into all these things and what's happening internally in my body at once? So um I just started, talking to her about like how her belly feels. And sometimes she'll be on the toilet and I wonder, I'm like, did she like get everything out? And so we do either blowing bubbles with our mouth, even if we don't have bubbles, we'll like do like we'll either breathe out or I'll say, oh, like she'll pretend to blow me over, I'll be
Yes,
like,
I love that.
oh, whatever works, right? And just and then I notice sometimes it relaxes her pelvic floor and then she's able to get the rest out. Because sometimes that was an issue too, right? We were like, oh, she's not going all the way. That's why like she just had an accident. You've know this. This is like you're mastered in this.
Yeah.
Um,
I love
but
hearing it from a parent perspective though, because I don't have children,
yeah.
so I get to experience all of these great, success stories from the parents that are working through this day and day.
Yeah, so I mean, and I was so hyped up about it because I started later with her because things were busy over the summer. Like we kind of were doing it, but we weren't consistent. I was blaming myself. I was like, this is my fault, I need to be more consistent. But when we started being more consistent, I was like, oh, it should be like clicking, right? And it just took more time. And once I realized that I just needed to just like cool it myself, then things started to fall into place, and even if she does have a little accident here and there, I'm like, it's okay. Like, I don't want her to feel shameful about it. I sometimes I say, oh, you were really busy and you couldn't tell like your bladder or like you couldn't tell that you were full. Like, I try to tell her like so she can connect like, oh, I was busy. I was really into this game and I forgot that I needed to go to the bathroom or I didn't realize I needed to go to the bathroom so that she could make that little connection and not feel bad about it and be like, oh, that's why, once we
Yeah,
know why, it really helps us move forward, I feel.
for sure.
So,
I like that you're taking that calm approach to it too. And I think that that's so important. I think there's a lot of stress around potty training because preschools and daycares, they're all like, potty training boot camp starting
oh
at
my
2.
gosh,
And
yeah.
like, there's so much
Yes.
stress. And I know it stresses parents. And then when kids feel the stress, coming off of your body, their stress,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be a stressful experience. And, I know you're kind of talking about how, sometimes she doesn't make it to the toilet. And I've really adopted from some of the other therapists that I've been learning from is changing my language from calling accidents to calling them leaks or
Mm-hmm.
spills or something like that because I think accident
Yeah.
is such like a negative tone to it where kids get like a little
Yeah.
about it, but you're like, oh, your platter leaked a little bit. That's okay. You were busy. Like you said, trying to
Yeah.
point out why maybe she didn't pick up on those cues. And I love
Yeah.
that you pointed out that really important piece is that yes, when we have to go to the bathroom, if our bladder is not fully bursting, you might not even recognize it. If your brain is
Mm-hmm.
honed in on somewhere else, it's not worrying about our bladder right now because it's not
Yes.
full. But when it's full, it's full. And you know that, us
Yes.
adults, when you're on a road trip and you're like, oh yeah, I can hold it, I can hold it. And then all of a sudden you're like, I need to pull off to the side of the road right now. I have two
Yes.
kids, like we experience as adults too. And
Yes.
I mean, they're 2, 3, 4 years old. Like they're just learning to control those muscles and coordinate everything down there and make
Hmm.
that brain bladder connection. So I know it can feel stressful, that kids are still, having leaks and accidents and all of that stuff, even after 4, 5, 6 years old, it's going to happen. And it's part of the process. It's normal. But
Yes.
for parents, if they are concerned about it, finding healthcare professionals and someone to help give you tidbits and guide you along the way, which is why I've taken such an interest in it, because it's an area where I think a lot of people shy away from it. They're like, I don't know how to like best guide you in this area. And I was like, all right, let's
I
figure
shy away
it
from
out.
it because
Yeah. I mean,
it
it's,
is complex unless you really dive in. Like,
yep.
there's certain routines and strategies and whatever books people write, but sometimes it takes a lot more than that, you
Same
know?
thing with sensory bedtime. And I'm so
Yeah.
grateful that you have taken the time to become an expert in that, because now people know who to go to get the right answers, and they don't have to bing bong around town to try to get from their pediatrician to a sleep consultant to this person, that person.
Yes.
Like,
And that's
I,
exhausting.
it's exhausting and
Yeah.
so expensive after you pay for all these different consults and meetings,
Yeah.
and you're like, I'm still back at square one. So we're so grateful for you and all of the knowledge that you've shared. And I know that everybody is going to find all of the resources that we're sharing with them today in the show notes super helpful. I know this conversation has been extremely enlightening for me. So where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work and get in contact with you?
Well, Instagram, my handle is courtneyenglish.ot. And then I also have a website, which is www.courtneyenglishot.com. So that's where you can find me.
Amazing. Well, that is it for today's episode of the Pediatric Playbook. I hope you found this conversation as insightful as I have. Remember, bedtime doesn't have to be a battle, and daily routines, you don't have to struggle through them. By tuning into your child's specific sensory needs and creating those routines that work for your family, you can transform the way you approach sleep and other routines. Thanks so, so much, Courtney, for sharing your expertise and all of your personal experiences.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yes. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode. See you next time, friends. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation and found it helpful as you navigate along this journey, whether that's supporting kids, growing as a therapist, or both. If you're looking for more resources, tips, or support, be sure to check out my website linked in the show notes and connect with me on social media at Your Pediatric OT on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or wherever else you can find me. You'll find everything from free guides to in-depth courses designed to help you make an even bigger impact. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Pediatric Playbook. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend or colleague who'd love it too. I can't wait to see you next time, same place, same time, right here on the Pediatric Playbook.